So how do you build a country from nothing? I mean, how do you go from the third world to the first in just one generation? It sounds impossible, right? Well, today we're going to break down the core principles behind Singapore's incredible transformation. And we're doing it through the eyes of someone who was right there in the trenches, Mr. Lim Siong Wan, a man who literally helped build its world-class civil service from the ground up. All right, let's jump in. First, we'll look at the sheer scale of the challenge, building a nation from scratch. Then, we're going to unpack 3 key principles that were just foundational to their strategy. We'll talk about being useful, the freedom to fail, and thinking like an architect. And finally, we'll tackle a really interesting question. What do you do when the very playbook that made you a success just doesn't work anymore? Okay, so let's set the scene. Picture it, 1965. Singapore is suddenly an independent nation. But here's the thing. It has nothing. No natural resources, deep social divisions, and a future that was, to put it mildly, completely uncertain. They had to build everything, and I mean everything from the ground up. Their economy, their infrastructure, even their military. Now, to pull this off, the leaders knew they needed a seriously brilliant civil service. So they put out this urgent call to the nation's brightest minds. And that included a young mechanical engineer named Lim Siong Wan. He's over at Cambridge working on his PhD, and he gets the message to cut it short. Why? Because, and this is a direct quote, Singapore desperately needs you. Talk about pressure, right? So he comes back, education in hand, ready to go, and he steps right into his first job. And he very quickly learns that all those fancy theories from university, they don't mean much out here. Success was about something way more fundamental, just solving the real, immediate problems right in front of you. And that brings us to our very first principle. So put yourself in his shoes for a second. You're this young engineer, fresh out of university, but the team you're supposed to lead, they're mechanics who are twice your age with decades of hands-on experience. You've got the degree, they've got the real-world know-how. So how do you lead? How do you even begin to add value? Okay, so it's his very first day on the job, and he sees something that just doesn't make sense. There are these workers, and they're meticulously painting this old, rusted road roller. And he's thinking, why are you painting a piece of junk that's about to be scrapped? So he asks them, and they explain, well, if an inspector comes and sees the rust, we get blamed for poor maintenance. But if we paint it, it'll look fine, pass inspection, get officially condemned, and then we can finally get a new one. And that was a huge aha moment for Mr. Lim. He realized these guys weren't just mechanics mindlessly following orders. No, they were clever. They were pragmatic. They were problem solvers who understood exactly how the system actually worked, not just how the rulebook said it was supposed to work. So what did he do? He didn't come in and start bossing them around with his textbook knowledge. That would have been a disaster. Instead, he figured out the one thing he could do that they couldn't. As an engineer, he had the authority to sign the official paperwork for spare parts. So he made himself their enabler, not their boss, but the guy who could get them what they needed to do their jobs. He made himself useful. And that, right there, is the core of this first principle, pragmatism. Or, to put it even more simply, just be useful. It sounds so basic, doesn't it? But it's built on some really deep ideas. It's about humility. It's about respecting the expertise of the people on the front lines. And it's about focusing like a laser on what actually works, not just on what the procedure says. All right, so pragmatism helps you get things done. But what happens when you need to invent something totally new, when there's no existing system to navigate? This is where our second principle comes into play, and it was championed by another one of Singapore's key architects, Dr. Goh Keng Swee. He knew that to build something like a modern military from zero, you needed a culture that wasn't just useful, but one that was absolutely unafraid to try bold, maybe even crazy ideas. And the challenge here was just massive. Think about it. Singapore had zero military tradition. How on earth do you build an air force out of thin air? And maybe even harder, how do you convince your citizens to become fighter pilots? Well, Dr. Goh's plan was, honestly, it was brilliant and really holistic. He didn't just think about the planes, he thought about the people. So first, he starts a junior flying club for students. Smart. Second, uses cost-effective gliders for the initial training to keep costs down. Makes sense. But then, here's the stroke of genius. He invited girls to join too. Why? Because he was thinking decades ahead. He knew they were the future mothers whose support would be absolutely crucial for generations of soldiers to come. I mean, wow. But the plan hit a major snag. A very real physical one. Turns out, Singapore is an island, and because of that, it just doesn't have the right kind of thermal air currents that you need for gliders to, you know, glide, to stay in the air. The core of their brilliant plan was a total, complete failure. So what did they do? Did they waste time trying to force it to work? Did they launch a big investigation to figure out who to blame? Nope. They immediately abandoned the project. They just cut their losses and moved on. The real lesson here wasn't the failure itself. It was the speed of their response. And this mindset came straight from the top. This quote from Dr. Goh was apparently plastered all over the Ministry of Defense. He created a culture where making a mistake wasn't something to be ashamed of. It was seen as an essential, totally necessary part of making progress. Because, as he said, the ultimate mistake is just not doing anything at all. Okay, so we've got just be useful and the freedom to fail. This third principle comes right from the top, from Singapore's first Prime Minister, Lee Kuan Yew, and his perspective was even bigger. He wasn't just thinking about managing an organization, he was thinking like an architect, designing an entire society. And for him, it was all built on one single foundation: trust. And Mr. Lee drew a really sharp line here. He said, look, a company can just fire its worst performing employees to boost the bottom line. But a government can't do that. A government has to look after everyone in the country, whether they're successful or not. It's a totally different ballgame. For him, the single most important asset a government has is the trust of its people. And he broke that trust down into 3 key parts. First, care. People have to believe your intentions are good. Second, competence. They have to believe you actually know what you're doing and can solve problems. And third, commitment. They have to believe that you'll actually follow through and deliver on your promises. So there you have it. Be useful, have the freedom to fail, and build trust. These principles were the engine that took Singapore from third world to first. But what happens when the road you've been following just ends? What happens when the path that got you here runs out? That's the challenge for tomorrow. And this really lays out the new reality perfectly. You know, back in '65, Singapore was 30 or 40 years behind the developed world. So the strategy was simple, really. Find out what works, copy it, and then make it better. Fast forward to today, and they've caught up. They're at the front of the pack. The problem? There's no one 30 years ahead to copy from anymore. Mr. Lim tells this really powerful little story about a young woman who starts her own company. And you know what her biggest obstacle was? Her own mother. A loving mother who just could not understand why her daughter would give up a safe, stable, well-paying job for some risky startup. And that mother, in a way, represents the whole country's dilemma. The very culture of safety and stability that created all this success is now the thing that could hold it back. So you see, the new challenge isn't a technical one, it's cultural. It's about shifting an entire national mindset away from copy and improve and towards genuine, homegrown innovation and creativity. And that's not something you can just fix with a new law. This is a 20 or 30-year project. It's a deep rewiring of the culture that has to start in every single home and every single school. A Swiss professor really nailed it when he told a group of Singaporean leaders, "You are world-class, and now you have to think for yourself." The message couldn't be clearer. The skills that get you to the top of the class aren't the same skills you need to lead from the front. You can't just look for the right answer in the back of the book anymore. You have to write the book. And this leaves us with a really big, critical question. The principles of that founding generation were perfect for building a remarkable nation by following a path that others had already laid out. But for the next generation, the challenge is completely different. So how do you teach an entire nation to stop just reading the map and start drawing it for themselves?